I am so glad today on the Elder Council to have my dear friend, Dr. Ger Graus, OBE, um, who is, we're talking to him from the United Kingdom. And we have had lots and lots of talks about education. You're my go to guy when I want to understand early childhood education, the how kids work into the workforce, um, how we think about children in general, both in our family but also in our community. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you again, Mark.
So, Gary, you travel all over the world talking about early childhood education, kids in the workplace, or learning what kind of career choices to make. Um, as you're out there, I'm really curious. What's the first question people ask you after you've given a talk?
That's a very interesting question. So I've worked. I did a little counting exercise, and I think I've worked across 43 countries,
Yeah.
In some shape or form, and and love it. And there's a couple of issues that strike me, and that is that across those 43 countries, the differences aren't as great as we might think.
Mm, mm,
Because I think the premise is very basic, isn't it? You are adults who have children, and the vast majority of the adults who have children love their children and want the best for them.
mm,
Where I think the differences come in is how do we translate that into actions, and how do we implement that? And there are cultural differences, and there are differences of poverty and affluence, and all those connections. The first question, because much of what I talk about, I use the words "for example" a lot. So they are rarely speeches; they're stories.
mm.
And the other thing is, I find it very difficult to disconnect the professional and the personal. So those stories are a mix of both. And I think because of that, that takes people by surprise sometimes. So quite often the first question then becomes, so what was your childhood like? And then you, in a sense, in your answer, you build on that. You tell more stories.
You've, which makes me think of the how we learn to behave and how we learn to live in the world is, as you said, based on your early childhood. That's your best recollection, is that. And if that childhood was positive and wonderful and nurturing, then you have a good chance of being positive, nurturing human and citizen. Yet a lot of times that's not the case. Dad was gone, or mom was gone working, or I mean, I was raised by my mom, but uh, she was never there. She was a nurse, so I didn't see her most of the time until the late evenings, usually. So I feel like I was raised by nannies and stuff. However, that's not the point. It's so then when you look at how you're going to relate with in your family, with your spouse and with your kids, that one instance is how you grew up. And if it wasn't positive, then you're going to try to, compensate for that and do a better job. And then those kids are going to model on that. So I think it's a generational thing. And how do you overcome if you didn't have that great childhood to model from? How do you overcome that and do? Because we always say want it better. We want it better for our kids than we had. So what do you do? How do you think about that as a dad?
I think it's a very good question. So my home childhood was a fairly unhappy one. But I had my granddad. So I think children are, without wishing to generalize, but children have radars and magnets. And given the opportunity, they will find the person to connect. Whether they are then given that opportunity to connect with those people becomes a different thing. In my case, it was very easy. It was my granddad. He literally lived the other side of the railway line, which was a 5-minute walk, and we spent a lot of time together from when I was very little. My father worked and was away a lot. My mother was a housewife. I grew up in the late 1950s. So that's the way it was. And my granddad was my hero, and I think about him every day. And there are aspects of his behavior that are still in me now. So that's incredibly important. And you know, so when I talk to parents now or teachers, you know that children have that built-in capacity to find people that like them and people that they like. And actually, a very good friend of mine, Carlo Rinaldi, who was the president of the very well-known Reggio Emilia Foundation in northern Italy that focuses on probably the world leaders in early childhood education. She very often says, she talks about the competent child, and that a child is a citizen from birth, and they're not future citizens. They have rights, and in their behaviors, we should give them responsibilities.
Give me an example of that. Give me an example of that.
So and this is because the other thing we do as adults, we overcomplicate things. So it's very simple. You recognize that they have rights. They have the right to, in my view, they have the right to speak. They have the right to be heard. They have the right to express themselves, and they have a responsibility to be respectful. Now that understanding comes from us, and children copy behavior. So what we put in front of them, they will copy. And I think we need to, as adults, we need to think that through very carefully. There's a very brilliant promotional video made by the University of West Sydney in Australia that actually shows children copying their parents' behavior. And if a 3-year-old child sits in the back of the car and the parent is the driver, and the parent rants and raves and swears and shouts at people, what do you think? How do you think that child is going to behave? So I think that there's an issue where, as adults, we need to reflect how important our behavior is, and how that gets modeled. And there is that wonderful quote from my favorite book, The Little Prince, which says that all grown-ups were once children, but only few of them remember it. And I think we need to remember, if what you say, and I agree with that you would take the rule that I'm now an adult, I was a child, certain things happened in my childhood that I would want my children to experience, and other things happened in my childhood that I would not want them to experience, then we need to recognize and understand that the most important aspect of that is the behavior that we model from the earliest of ages.
Someone once said to me, act as if, this was as a young entrepreneur, they said, act as if your board of directors is watching everything you do. And I've never been able to not have that in my head. Like, what if a board member was watching me do this thing right now? Children are little cameras.
Yeah, totally. And don't get me wrong, I think we have to also understand the complexity of this. Yeah, so parents are also people. They are busy, they work, they have feelings, they get hurt, they laugh, they smile, they want to spend time together, all that other stuff that goes on, as well as the children. And sometimes, actually quite often, it feels that there aren't enough hours in the day and that there isn't enough space on earth. And that then becomes a matter of, and again, easier said than done, that becomes a matter of priorities. What is important to us? And can we, and if the child, hopefully, is that important to us, then some other things have to go because we made a decision to have them. Therefore, we are responsible. We must also enjoy that. But I think we need to be very careful that we're not just speaking here from the comfort of our affluent Western living rooms, right? If I often use this as an example that whatever is incredibly important to me in terms of values and principles is not important to the parent who lives in the slums of Mumbai, whose only worry is to find food for his or her children for that day. And we must make absolutely sure that empathy rules and that we don't sit here from the comfort of our armchair pontificating what others should do. It's a values and ethics and morals related issue is parenting. And the other thing with it is, and I say this every time I speak to parents, there are so many books about parenting and so many people have said so many things. And there are so many times as the parent that you still feel incredibly isolated, that you're making it up as you're going along, that you sometimes lose your cool because you've had a bad day and all the other bits come into play. And I think there is this issue of reminding ourselves that there is no perfect parent and there is no perfect parenting. I think it's become more difficult because I think our world is more complex than when I grew up. It's also busier. The days are longer. The work is harder. Different, hard. Not my grandfather's coal mining hard, but I'm working globally. I need to at some point turn my phone off because somebody's awake somewhere all the time. That hard. So for all the books that have been written, somebody missed my story at some point.
I certainly, as a single father, felt a lot of that. I don't think I got any books. So it was just, just get a lot of times to get through the day, find someone to watch the kids. It was mostly my son. And so I could get to work and working 2 jobs. And for a period of that time, I did not have a car. So I put him in the bicycle seat and had a, thing for him and rode out to the university, which is about 12 miles from here, and plopped him in the daycare. And then, or I think it was a nursery school. He was 4 or 5. And then I would be in the kitchen at 6 a.m. So this sojourn started at 5 a.m. and then would get him and bring him back to the kitchen, and he would sit and work. And I taught him he grew up in a kitchen. So taught him when to yell at me when the pancakes had stopped steaming so we could turn them over. All kinds of things like that. One of the questions I have then is, because I learned early on, to your point, I had a choice to have him. I did not have a choice to have him by myself, but that is what happened. And I actually had a thing called family first. I don't know where I heard it, but it was like, okay, family first before me. I have to do things to make sure I have food on the table and I work and all of that. But everything was about him. And I said, look, it's only till he's 18 or so. And then it's not, right. It's still family first in the sense of picking up the phone and that kind of thing. What kind of solace could you provide for that single dad? Or, I mean, I know a lot of the people who listen to the show are in families where the wife drops the kids off with the dad in his new family and his new kids. So as you said, it's gotten more complicated. There's a lot of that. How do you help men cope with that? With all of the, because now I'll just leave the question at that. That's a long one.
I think first and foremost, I think people need to understand how important they are as a parent. Not self-importance, but that young little thing, and then the 18-year-old bigger thing later on. They look at and to their parents in admiration very often. Yeah, there's the role model element, and however tough it is, that's the bit to hang on to. But I also think we need to have, and in general, and certainly amongst men, a debate, an ongoing dialogue about what parenting actually is.
Hmm.
Because there are aspects of it that I see that I don't like very much. And there are aspects that, if I look back to my childhood, that I didn't like very much either. But I don't think we've got better at it. I think we've got smarter at sometimes writing off our responsibilities. So, for example, that's the school's responsibility. That's so-and-so's responsibility. I write the check if they go to independent school. I write the check for them to go to school. Don't bother me too much with it. That, I think, is the wrong attitude. But because we get busy, and because we're racing around, and because we do all those things, and 1,000 reasons and 1,000,000 excuses, we've come to this point. And I say this to parents when I speak at conferences, is why are you okay for a relative stranger to talk to your child about sex and relationship education without you being there? How does that work? It's so important, right? You've modeled to your youngsters all their lives, and then when it comes to talking about slightly uncomfortable things, a bit sticky, a bit embarrassing, whatever it is, we get somebody else to deal with it. We do this quite a lot as parents, and mea culpa, right? We've all done it. But I think we need to kind of slightly revisit this, because it's all very well us sitting talking about values and principles and morality and ethics. It takes that old adage, it takes a village to raise a child. And at the center of that village sits the parent. And the rest of the village essentially is value added and a resource. So I think we need to have that discussion around parenting and around the example we are. And whether you are a single parent, a single dad, or not, those principles don't change. What changes is that if you are single, it gets harder. Yeah? And if you are poor and single, it gets even harder. So, and that's kind of what it is. There need to be groups. There need to be. We have such technology. We have WhatsApp groups and all sorts of things. But there is an issue that at times I still sense. I certainly sense it in the UK. Now, I was born in the Netherlands, and I think we're probably in our minds and in our souls slightly more outgoing and liberated than my UK counterparts, where there is still the old colonial stiff upper lip at times, and boys don't cry kind of stuff. So I think there is something to get over, and that's not easy when you've been brought up. I know those communities. I was brought up in one of those communities in the Netherlands in those days, whereby men were hard, because they were, right? But that's okay to be hard in the world of work. But when it comes to your youngsters, you need to go back to reminding yourself what it was like to be a child. And I think we don't talk enough, and we certainly don't listen enough.
I'm hoping that this episode becomes something as a resource for dads and moms to be able to listen to. I was reminded of a behavior I see, and I'm not exactly sure how I feel about it. So I'm going to ask you, there are some people who see themselves as parents as their child's best friend, rather than the parent?
That's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, we all like to be, I think it's a human trait that we all like to be everybody, well, most people like to be everybody's best friend, I think. I think that's a human thing. We all like to be liked. Um, there is a balance here, isn't there? Because I referred to this earlier. If we are a role model and if the child looks at us and copies what we do, then there are certain things that are to do with behavioral rules. And when you are little, you push boundaries. Well, you push boundaries all your life, but when
Mm,
you're a child, you probably do more of it. And it's okay. It's okay to push boundaries. And I think rules are there to be stretched as far as possible, but they're not there to be broken. And somebody at some point needs to then say, that's just not how it goes, right? And that's quite hard if you are only the friend. That's the first observation. I think the second observation is this, particularly when children are younger. I'm not quite sure that they want you to be their best friend. They want you to be their parent. They will have that in mind. There's a distinct difference between my 6-year-old little buddy next door and my dad. And that's okay, by the way. So I think we just need to be careful with this. And because what kind of a person at the end of that ride, at the end of the ride, when they're 25 or 18 or 30 or whatever they are, our children, what kind of person would we like them to be? It's an interesting question, isn't it? And in order to get to that journey, there are certain things that need to happen. And we need to very often lead by example. I want my children to be kind. I want them to be woke. I want them to be so woke that it annoys lots of people who hate woke people. Woke means being very good at standing in somebody else's shoes. It's about empathy, isn't it?
mm,
It's about
mm.
kindness. It's about having a good heart. I think that's one of the most important things around. Well, you can write many books about this, and you can get your children to watch quite a lot of television programs about this. But what in the end will make the difference is what you and your surrounding, your community model. I want my children to be able to cope with the unexpected items in the bagging area of life. I want them to be confident. I want them to get good grades, but that comes much later. Yeah, so we should, as parents, and we should have this should be part of that dialogue I mentioned earlier, is to actually say, well, what 5, 7, or 10 things are for me as a parent not negotiable that I want my child to be. I want them to be kind. First and foremost, I want them to be kind. I want them to have a good work ethic. I don't mean working down the mines. I mean be capable to roll your sleeves up and do things and make things happen. And I'm sure that people can come up with their own. But those things to me matter immensely. And I think we don't think enough about what the it's an odd way of putting it, but what the end product should be
Uh,
like in our view.
You're talking to a software guy, so I like to reverse engineer things. So I'm imagining at child 1.0 and teenager 1.0 and young adult 1.0 and young parent 1.0, and you're the product manager for that product. And how do you want that product to be? I think I would like to assign a piece of homework to someone to write down that list of things when once they've left left the nest, so to speak, and you see them and you're able to see them without them knowing you're watching them. What would you like to see? Kindness, work ethic, those things. I would encourage people to sit down. I know I've never made that list, but what a great exercise that would be to have that ideal. It's kind of an ideal thing, and then
And
say,
it's sorry, Mark, this is really important. It's personal. It's personal, of course, to the child, but it is personal to the parent.
Yeah.
Because it is about their values. And so I suspect that many of the things that we're talking about will end up on everybody's list. But for example, the ranking order might be different. And I think that's important. And what concerns me, I was asked to contribute to an article about Gen Z that has just been published. And I worry about Gen Z a great deal. I worry about Gen A as well, incidentally. I worry about from Gen A to Z. And I thought we'd run out. I didn't realize we started again. I thought we'd run out. I thought there was no more. But what worries me about it is this, that this nonsense, in inverted commas, of putting people in boxes concerns me. The generalizations that suit the consumer market. This is a Gen Z trade. How dare they speak about my children like that and as if they are the same as everybody else? I do seriously worry about it. I've got my list because I can't remember these things, right? The Elder Council, my memory goes, so I've got post-its. So I've got next to me when they were all born, these X and whatever, and boomers. And apparently I'm not even a boomer. I'm something like a boomer plus or whatever they are. And what concerns me about it is that when you put people in boxes and you attribute characteristics to those boxes, they become self-fulfilling prophecies.
Right.
I told you,
right.
That's how they behave.
Yeah.
And I think this is unhelpful, and we need to. I understand why it matters in some cases to the commercial world, for example, but I think we need to fight this a little bit and actually say, so somebody like the wonderful Greta Thunberg, for example, she doesn't fit anywhere. So what does she become then? I want my children. I have 3 children. They're different. And actually, my eldest daughter is 28, and my youngest daughter is 18, and I have the boy in the middle. And for all the Gen this and Gen that, my eldest daughter, for me, is a pre-iPhone child. Right? And my youngest daughter was born with an iPhone in her hand, and her first words were, "What's the password?" Right? So so they are both kind. They will both cope with whatever is thrown at them in the bagging area of life. They both have a brilliant work ethic. They both like to travel. They have many things in common. But where there is a difference because of when they were born is in their confidence towards technology.
Mm.
And in a sense, that is where they are, in the nicest possible way, a victim of their time.
Yeah.
So when we are born, and I often use this as an example. My granddad was born in 1891. And as a young boy, he remembered the first car in the village. And somebody walked in front of the car with a red flag because apparently cows would get scared and all sorts of things. And he died 6 months after the first man landed on the moon. And with 2 world wars in between and all that stuff. And I look at my granddad, and then I look at my parents, and I look at me, and now I look at my children. And my granddad couldn't read or write. So I remember sitting in the living room and my grandmother reading the newspaper to him. I also remember him signing with a cross. And my youngest daughter, with a little bit of luck, is about to go to Oxford University to study Spanish and Italian. Both had a brilliant work ethic. Both were incredibly kind. Both coped with the bagging area of life very well. But both were victims of circumstances, as in when they were born and where they were born, etc. And we need to collectively, as adults, recognize the role that we positively can play as a role model, not just to our own children, but to other people's children, and how we can contribute to the greater good and a social mobility that moves everybody upwards, not just financially, but also in all sorts of other ways. And that is why we need a societal dialogue about the role of parenting. We're not just there to drop them off at school. How many parents actively seek to engage with children's teachers? Incidentally, how many schools welcome parents really well, right? So that's a double-edged sword. But we need to, if you, Mark, or I take our children, as we have done, we've traveled, we've taken them to museums and galleries, we've been to theatre performances with them. This is part of their menu from a very young age. Their values change, their confidence has changed because of those things. And we need to understand as parents that that also is our role as a role model, an enabler, an empowerer. And at the same time, we need to remember that we too were once children. I had this classic example. There's a guy a couple of years ago, I was speaking at a conference in Moscow, and there was a group of parents, a huge auditorium. And this guy says to me, he says, you know what, when my daughter comes home, she's 14, when she comes home, the first thing she does is put her bag down where I don't want her to put it down. And then she gets on the phone and she FaceTimes the mates she's just left behind. How silly is this? So I said to him, let me tell you a story. In the late 1960s, early 1970s, I used to cycle back from school. And then I used to get back home and I used to put my bag where my mother didn't want me to put the bag. And then I went and sat on the stairs and I picked up the phone and I rang my friends who I just left behind. The difference was I couldn't FaceTime. There was a cord that was attached to the phone, and it cost a damn size more, relatively speaking, in my time than it did now. Does this ring a bell with you, my dear friend? And he said, rather embarrassed, well, I suppose so. And then I quoted at him that quote from Antoine de Saint-Exupéry that said, you know, all grown-ups were once children, but you've forgotten what it was like, basically. And I think we need to think about parenting as, we speak about it as a job, right? And it is a vocation. And that's a very different thing.
Tell me. So I know what the difference is between those, but explain it to our listener.
Well, so a job is, in my simple mind, a job is something that you do in a set period of time that you get rewarded for financially, be it in pocket money terms or be it in an employment job, and it has a start and an end. Either the job per se or over a lifetime. I've been a carpenter for 40 years and now I retire. And if you're lucky, you like what you do. I've been lucky. I'm assuming that because you want children, that you love what you do. It never ends, because like you, I thought, oh, once they're out of uni, it'll be all right. Every time my daughter is soon off on holiday to the Dominican Republic, and I'm starting to look when the windy season is or whatever else. You worry all the time. It's in the person specification of a parent, I suppose. The vocation bit is about that the means, the modus operandi is about caring, and the outcome is about the person. Whereas the job, it's a set period of time. And if you're lucky, you like it. And I think because it's a vocation, we need to, because it's about caring, and because caring is difficult, we need to talk more amongst each other about what this parenting is.
So you don't get a vacation from your vocation.
No, you don't. Very clever. No, you don't. But you can get a vocation from your job, although that seems to be becoming harder because of technology.
Yes.
But that maybe that's maybe for another time. Right? I do think in this bit about putting ourselves in our children's shoes and the empathy bit, we must also acknowledge that there are things we don't know. We're just stabbing in the dark. It's guesswork, right? And some of that is very concerning. So I worry a great deal about the impact and the speed, more than anything else, the speed, the development of technology and the impact that will have on our children. And actually, if somebody says, well, what's your evidence for this? Then apart from a few pieces of research that have been published by some top universities, there isn't any evidence yet, because we've only just really started that speedy journey. But if I look at my youngest daughter, I sometimes think, I mean, I admire her. Obviously, I love her deeply, but I admire her greatly. But I sometimes think, I don't know how you cope, because you exist so many times. You are you, and then you're online. But online, you're a different you on LinkedIn, and another different you on TikTok, and another different one on Facebook and on Instagram. And so you exist about 6, 7 times, because each time you behave slightly differently, because that is the expectation. And I worry that that's a pressure on young people. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we are perfectly capable of coping with that. But it's a little bit like smoking, isn't it? You find out many years later whether it was good or bad for you. And I think the jury is out on the technology piece.
You know, you're talking about code switching, what I call code switching. This ability to be different people to different I think Sly and the Family Stone, when I was growing up, talked about the different masks that we have to wear. And so it was kind of the same thing. And they're learning it probably younger, but that's actually a skill of learning how to be different at work with a boss or in these different situations. I want to switch a little bit to um, this idea of children. Let's say we've done a really great job of establishing core values with them young, and to your point, they see us. I loved your example of the child sitting in the back seat and how much they see and learn from how the driver interacts with the mom and dad. Are they arguing? Are they loving? Are they, hey, look at that? Or are they interested? They remember that you're in the back seat. So let's say that's baked in my mind between 4 and 7. That's kind of baked, and now you have less impact because the school has impact. Their friends have impact. Oh, Dad, I don't want to hang out with you. I want to go hang out with my buddies. And then that changes as they go to work, and they are thinking in high school, like, I'm going to go to college. What do I want to be not when I grow up? What do I want to be when I leave? How am I going to feed myself in that? You have some rather unique experience in building an environment called Kidzania that is designed to give kids a glimpse into all the different possibilities there are. Why don't you tell our listener what that's about and why that's so important?
Well, it's interesting because we put things into boxes. So Kidzania is originally a Mexican concept, and it's now global. And essentially, what they are, they're cities built for children. So everything is 2/3 size, and each of those cities has somewhere between 40 and 60 work-related activities, from window cleaning to a transplant surgeon, from a pilot in a real aeroplane with real flight simulators, to a newsreader, a journalist, etc. And those activities, and this is incredibly important, and back to the role model piece, those activities are sponsored by real companies. So in Qatar, in the Middle East, where I will be next week, the aeroplane is sponsored by Qatar Airways. Children's observations were, incidentally, this is about the importance of role modeling, not just as an individual, but also corporately. Children's observations were that their favorite activities were those that were branded, which took me by surprise. But the next question was why, and the answer was, well, because Kidzania Airways is not real and Qatar Airways is. So again, the child as an observer, much more competent than we give them credit for. So it's for 4 to 14-year-olds. They arrive there, they earn money, Keynesian money for those activities, so they can spend, they can earn, they can spend, they can save, they get interest. It's like a normal economy. The concept then is that once they are inside, adults are there to be seen and not heard. Right? So the children are independent. Parents are appalling at that because they have to helicopter and tell children what to do. So I'll just throw that in, that there's an element of leave the kids alone, a la Pink Floyd, but also there's an element of trust. And as Carla Rinaldi, my friend, says, we must trust the children as much as they trust us. So the activity then goes on, and the children essentially live, earn, spend in this city. And what then happens, and because they are independently learning, they get a little bracelet so they can log into every activity. And if in the case of an emergency they need to be found, the Kidzania can find them. In the US, the only Kidzania at the moment is in Dallas, but there are expansion plans. That incidentally then also gave us the opportunity to look at data. So what I said to the analysts was, can you tell me the first activity a child chooses on a school visit without the helicoptering parents, right? And of course the answer is yes. So the global sample now stands at approximately 600,000 across 10 countries, I think. So I got the sample. And then my next question was, so can you tell me who those children are who've made those choices? Are they 4? Are they 14? Are they boys? Are they girls? Are they black? Are they white? Are they urban? Are they rural? Are they rich? Are they poor? From which country are they? And so the answer we got was yes, we can. Of course, all anonymized. And then the analysts and numerous universities did their work in presenting the reports. And a number of the findings, first of all stereotypes were set at the age of 4. So boys become pilots, girls become cabin crew. Girls become newsreaders. No, sorry, boys become newsreaders, girls become weather forecasters. And so it goes. Yeah. The second finding was that there's in choice terms, there was almost no difference in behavior terms between 4 and 14-year-olds. So despite all those years at school, that stereotype aspect still existed. Third finding was that globally, almost all girls, regardless of their background, choose activities below the age range. 9-year-old girls choose 7-year-old activities. 9-year-old boys choose 9 or 10-year-old activities. The fourth finding was that children from poor backgrounds choose poor paying jobs, if that's the right way of putting it. So a child from a very disadvantaged background will never choose the aeroplane or the newspaper or the television studio or the operating theater in the hospital as their first choice. They, as their first choice, will choose window cleaning, working in a supermarket, making beds in a hotel, or being a courier. And the final finding was that globally, the differences between the countries were statistically insignificant. So there are some aspects in there, aren't there, that affect us as parents and as the grown-ups around the young child. So if in 4-year-olds, the stereotypes have already manifested themselves, where does that come from? We can't blame the schools. What role, and also none of us as adults have gone out and go, I'm now going to make sure that my child adheres to stereotypes. So what is it they see? They see much more than we understand and than we know. And as parents, it becomes our job to turn on our radars, get ourselves down to the youngsters' level. I did this once in a big shopping mall in London. I spent half a day in a wheelchair being pushed around. So I had the height of a 7 or 8-year-old. And if you take that position and you go into shops and you look into shop windows, it becomes a very interesting picture what you see. So we as parents need to know these things. Because once we know, we can actually not correct, but we can guide in different and sometimes better directions. And so that for me is where this is very important. And that's where the messaging of these activities. So, and I actively encourage other organizations who work with children in the edutainment sector, as it is so awkwardly called, to say, if you got data, publish the data. The parents need to know this. Now, mind the schools, parents need to know this, because they can then begin to think differently about their role as the role model and almost like the guide to a child's development and learning out of school. Because we need to very clearly distinguish between education, big piece, 0 to 99, if we're lucky, and schooling, which is a couple of years, some days per year, some hours per day, right? And we mustn't confuse the two. So the parent who makes the effort to sit down with his son or daughter, the dad who does that, and watch a David Attenborough program is actually empowering their child to be educated. Their presence is important because to the child it will seem that they too are interested in being educated.
I feel like I want to unpack the 100 different sentences you had, which would lead to 100 different episodes. You clearly gave us so much to think about. Thank you. I just deeply appreciate. I appreciate your friendship, but I also appreciate these life lessons you have to pass on to our listeners. It's just, this is gold. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Mark. It's a pleasure. And we must do this again one day.